Welcome back to the Mama Podcast. This week we're doing something really important. We're turning the spotlight onto the people at the very heart of maternity care and asking one big question. What do midwives wish the system knew? To explore this, Heidi's joined by the brilliant Leah Hazard, a midwife of almost 12 years who works in maternity triage. She's also an author, a trustee and ambassador for organisations supporting parents facing vulnerability, as well as a vocal advocate for change in maternity services. In this episode, Leah gives us a real behind-the-scenes view of life as a midwife. The impact of low staffing, the emotional and physical toll of working under pressure, the reality of moral injury when midwives can't give the care they were trained to provide, and why safe staffing and proper funding are absolutely crucial for families and for staff. We also talk about media narratives around midwives, why speaking up can be so hard, and where Leah still finds hope for the future of maternity care. If you're pregnant, hoping to be, or you've had a baby before, this conversation isn't about scaring you. It's about honesty, transparency, and pushing for a system that truly supports both parents and the professionals caring for them. We do touch on difficult themes like birth trauma and staff mental health, so please only listen if you're in the headspace to do so.
Welcome to this episode of the Mama Podcast. I'm Heidi Eldridge, the CEO and founder of Mama Academy, the safer pregnancy charity. Thank you so much for joining us, Leah. It's just absolutely wonderful to have you here today. I know that we've got a lot to discuss, but do you want to start by introducing yourself to our listeners so that everybody knows who you are?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on with you today. My name's Leah, and I've been a midwife for just almost exactly 12 years now. I think my first shift as a qualified midwife was just before Halloween, and we're now talking in the first week of November. So just had my anniversary, I guess. And in that time, I've also become an author, writing several books about not just maternity care, but reproductive health care more broadly, and kind of accidentally become an outspoken advocate for change in maternity services. I am also, on that note, a trustee for AMA Birth Companions, which provides perinatal support for families experiencing vulnerability, mainly in the asylum system here in Scotland. And I'm an ambassador for Companions, which is a London-based organisation supporting parents also experiencing vulnerability in early motherhood, usually in the incarceration system, but also going through other forms of kind of social care experience. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but it's great having a kind of portfolio career. And I'm also a mother of two young women who have left home now, so big girls now.
Wow, are you really? Oh my God.
Yes, I'm 48 and loving it. I definitely old enough to have two big girls, but they're out in the world doing wonderful things.
Wow, that's amazing. And whereabouts are you based?
So I am in Scotland. I don't ever speak publicly about exactly where I live and work, just out of respect for my employers, because obviously, while I'm outspoken about maternity care, I don't really want to put the spotlight on my personal kind of work environment, much as I would love to talk about it. So I just say, yeah, I'm in Scotland, and I work in a large urban maternity hospital.
That's fantastic. So obviously you're on the front line, right on the front line of maternity care. So what does a typical day on the front line look like? How, in reality, does that differ from what policymakers imagine?
I think it's very, very different from what a lot of people imagine. So although I've worked in kind of every clinical area of NHS midwifery, or almost every clinical area, from labour ward to ante and postnatal ward to community, I mainly work in maternity triage, which I describe as being like A&E for pregnant people. So it's really the front line of the front line. It's the first point of contact. It's the place where you would come in if you were in labour, but also with any other acute or urgent problem in pregnancy, birth, or the postnatal period. So that's everything from reduced fetal movement, bleeding, infection, generally feeling unwell, road traffic accident, mental health emergencies, mastitis, wound infection, you name it, we see all of it. So the only thing that's the same about every day is that no day is the same because we never know exactly what's coming through the door. And that's part of what makes the job so challenging, but also part of what makes it so interesting as well. It's a very fast-paced, pressurized environment. But we do work very much hand in glove with doctors, which I think is something that not a lot of people possibly completely understand, is that it's very much a teamwork environment. We solve problems and collaborate together. And I love that aspect of my job. But it is incredibly intense. The workload can be extreme. And, unlike some other environments, we can't say no. We can't put a cap on our workload. My husband, for example, is a mechanic in the ambulance service, so he fixes ambulances all day long. And he often says, in his work, if they get, say, 4 or 5 or 6 ambulances to repair in the one day, he can put his hand up and say, we can't actually do that today safely, so that's going to have to wait for another day, or they're going to have to go to another workshop. And midwives in triage can't do that, and we can't limit our workload at all. So I think it's an area of maternity that's kind of often overlooked, but it is very much the front of the front line.
That is so interesting and such a great way for us to think about it, and how do sort of staff shortages, and obviously you're under a great deal of pressure, how does that affect a midwife's ability to provide sort of safe, compassionate care?
It definitely does have an effect. And I think regardless of which area of maternity you're working in, let's say, for example, you work in a department where there should be, I don't know, 6 staff on a shift, but for whatever reason, there are 3 staff on a shift. So that means each member of staff is having to do the work of 2 midwives, right? So your workload has immediately doubled. So that obviously affects the time you can give to each woman or person. It affects how carefully you can really think about what's happening with them. It affects the extent of detail you can give when counseling them about anything or discussing anything with them. It probably affects your break time. So you may not get breaks, or you may get fewer breaks or shorter breaks simply because you're trying to keep up with this double workload. It means if adverse events happen during that day, you have less time to escalate them or record them, or maybe you don't record them at all, which then obviously has a knock-on effect on how safety is monitored or audited in your department. And also just the cognitive and emotional and physical load of having to do that extra work. Can't be underestimated. It's incredibly stressful. And, again, it's one of these situations where if you're short-staffed, you don't really have a choice to say, this is too much for me, I can't do this safely. You just kind of have to get on with it. And when you leave your shift at the end of 12 hours or, 8 or 10 hours or whatever your pattern is, it doesn't just end there. If you've had a day where you've had an excessive workload or excessive responsibilities, every midwife I know will then go home thinking about that. And that will affect, her mood, her relationships with the people she lives with or cares for, her sleep, and how well she's looking after herself, and with, nutrition, exercise, whatever other aspects of life usually give her pleasure. So, and that's just in one day. But if that's happening cumulatively every day or most days, then what you see is this kind of wide scale effect of really poor retention, of midwives leaving the register well before retirement, because they're burnt out, because they're anxious, because they don't feel they can give the care that they would like to give. And that is borne out by every year the NMC's kind of audit of who's leaving the register and why. These are kind of well evidenced phenomena. So overwork really has a definite effect on not just the midwife, but also the care that she can give to the woman. Because if the midwife is burnt out, stressed, anxious, fearful, then she can't be, or he or they can't be their best self for the people that they're looking after. So that's why, a lot of, well, maybe diplomatic here, some patient safety campaigners say that it's not about staffing. that, terrible things have happened in circumstances where a ward has been fully staffed. And that is absolutely true. Sometimes that will happen. But it's naive or maybe just blinkered to suggest that safe staffing, that full staffing has no effect on safety. And I'm saying that as somebody who has, boots on the shop floor. It doesn't matter how good your working culture is or how effective your team working is or what training you've had if your labor ward is supposed to have 12 midwives and every day they have 7. That's just it. It's very stark.
Of course, that's going to have a huge effect. So, what do you wish that the leaders understood about the emotional and physical toll that midwives carry with them when things don't go to plan?
I mean, I wish they knew what that was like, but I don't know how better to convey that to people because we've been shouting about it for years, and there's a massive body of evidence from academics and unions and so on that there is an enormous toll on staff who aren't able to give the care they were trained to provide. The thing about midwifery training in the UK is it generally is excellent. We have the capacity to train phenomenal new midwives, and I do a lot of work with students, and they consistently impress and amaze me with how motivated they are, how interested, how engaged, how switched on, and how they really want to do the right thing and go out and do a great job. But then, and I see this over and over again, they go out into the clinical environment and immediately they are under-resourced, understaffed, their hands are tied, they can't give the level of care they've been trained to provide. And what happens there is what's called moral injury, which is a term that originated to describe soldiers in the military who were having to act in a way or do things in the course of service that were in deep conflict with their own values and ethics. And we've seen this term moral injury now applied to care staff, not just midwives, but all across the sector, because there's this dissonance between what we would like to do for people and how much we care and the way we actually have to behave and act at work, given the limited resources that we have. And that is deeply injurious. And that's something that I think is difficult to convey to someone if they haven't witnessed that environment or they don't know somebody who's going through it. But it's devastating, and dare I say, even fatal in some cases. For my next book, Birth Wars, which we can talk about, shameless plug, there's a chapter in it about mental health, not just perinatal mental health, but staff mental health as well. And there's pretty strong evidence that for an increasing number of midwives, this conflict, this moral injury of not being able to provide the care they would like to provide, can lead to deep depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation or even behavior. So that might seem a bit extreme, but I think maybe we have to put it in those stark terms for people to understand how serious the problem is.
So the theme of this episode is what midwives wish the system knew. So I'm just wondering what the first thing that kind of springs to mind for you is.
Well, it's a great question. And I think in order to answer it, we kind of have to define who or what is the system. So what is this potential audience that we're trying to communicate with? And I think there are politicians, and I think there's kind of the general public. I think I wish politicians and the public understood actually what the role of the midwife is. There was a lot of news in Scotland last week about maternity, and our Health Secretary Neil Gray stood up in the Scottish Parliament and he said, "Oh, this is such a shame that women have been let down and maternity staff have been let down. And those nurses who are speaking out, they were really brave." And I thought, you know what? You almost had it right. You had one job. Nurses are not midwives. Midwives are not nurses. I think that's a basic misconception that I would love to correct. I think people don't understand that midwifery is a role in itself, completely distinct and separate from nursing. We are, and no disrespect to nurses who are phenomenal, but we are not them. our role is all about the childbearing year and looking after pregnant people. And it's very specific, it's very complex, it's highly skilled, and we are autonomous practitioners, which is something quite different from other roles. Also, in today's NHS, we work with incredibly complex populations, not just medically complex, but socially complex. We often liaise not just with medical staff, with other sectors like healthcare, criminal justice, voluntary sector, home office. Our clientele, I work in a big city, it's incredibly diverse. So we have to have a knowledge of not just clinical knowledge, but all of these other systems and processes that our clients, our demographic needs. And I just don't think that's really understood especially by politicians. Maybe general public have a little bit more understanding because some of them have given birth or, gone through that system. So I would love for that to be corrected. I think another misconception that I would love the public to understand, and particularly the media, is that midwives are not universally bad people. Now, I'm not here to be an apologist for bad care, and I understand that people can and do come to harm in the maternity system, and that's inexcusable. But the vast majority of midwives go to work every day or every night because they want to do a good job. They want to care for people. The job in a way is self-selecting. We definitely wouldn't go into it for the money or the fun because it's not very well paid. It's not very much fun. So you would only do it if you really cared and wanted to make a difference. Just yesterday, there was an article in The Observer where somebody was quoted as saying that all midwives and doctors have a God complex, and they think because they work hard, they're incapable of making mistakes. That's almost exactly a direct quote. In my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. We're all very reflective. We are all scrutinizing our own practice all the time. We live in permanent fear of making mistakes, even just inadvertently hurting somebody. And we want to do a really good job. I think maybe that used to be the perception of midwives, but it's definitely swung the other way recently.
That's very true. That's very true. So do you feel midwives' professional voices are truly sort of listened to and respected? What would you change?
I don't actually think that midwives' professional voices are listened to or respected on the whole. And I think there's been a real vacuum of leadership at the top. Not that the leadership necessarily isn't there, but it's maybe not as vocal or as visible as we need it to be. We see this really negative coverage of midwives in the news, on television, on social media, and print media, and it generally goes completely unchallenged. Things are written about midwives that are just blatantly not true, and there's nobody out there in the public eye saying, actually, this is how it is. Yes, that might be the case, but also this, or this is the context, or this is the clinical reality. Well,
So yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is important. And I think, sometimes when I talk about this, I give the example of, remember a few years ago when there were constant train strikes, and Mick Lynch was the head of the RMT, the railway union. And you just could not open a newspaper or turn on the news without seeing Mick Lynch talking about how amazing, railway staff were and how they deserve fair pay and fair conditions. And even if you had no interest in trains, you kind of could identify his face and his name, go, there's, Mick Lynch again on the picket line going on about trains. And I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with, everything he's all about or anything like that, but just using it as an example of somebody who was just an absolute unequivocal staunch advocate for the trade, the role that he was representing. And there's never been a time like the current moment for somebody like that to speak up for midwives, but it's just not there.
And so because of that, because of this media stigma that we've got at the moment, do you think that sort of influencing workplace culture, especially in terms of sort of blaming and fear and whistleblowing? Because I imagine that's having a big effect in preventing midwives from, raising certain safety concerns if they need to.
Yeah, it's really, really challenging. And it's something, obviously that affects me as well, because I mean, you asked me about kind of where I work, which is absolutely fine. And I can't say that. And I can't talk about my workplace because of exactly these issues. Um, I do think midwifery is characterized at the moment by a culture of fear and blame, and that has been highlighted by, any number of investigations from England, Scotland, and beyond. Um, Although every NHS trust will have a so-called whistleblowing procedure, and the official party line is that people are welcome to whistleblow and will be protected. Sadly, that's not really been the case for many whistleblowers or people just trying to raise concerns of any kind. And I get, because I'm fairly active on social media, I get DMs every day, almost sometimes hourly, minutely, depending on what's in the news, from midwives all across the UK, from every nation, saying, telling me what's going on in their workplace and saying, I wish I could do something about this, or please don't share this, but this is what's happening. And I carry all that in here. And I think that's what motivates me to speak up in the safest, most professional way I can, because I would like to feel like all of these hardworking people have some voice or have some feeling of agency. But sadly, we know that lots of midwives are working in places where um, raising concerns is encouraged in theory, but discouraged in practice. And that doesn't help anybody, because at the end of the day, it's about patient safety. And when staff don't feel able to raise concerns, if we can't expose those flaws, there's no way that we can, correct them and make the system safer.
Do you have a solution to that? I mean, I'm just thinking, is it in certain trusts, is it certain individual hospitals that have a different attitude to others? Because we get told certain things ourselves. And more recently, there was a problem with certain growth charts, and out about this issue with the growth charts, and we know that an organisation went to the leadership of that trust and presented their findings and said, look, this is the issue. Perfect solution, you just need to change the growth chart, for instance. And unfortunately, the leaders weren't really interested in fixing it. They were just interested as to who had provided them with that information, which sent chills down my spine, to be honest. And I think there is a problem at the moment because people just don't want to feel the blame. They don't want to feel the responsibility. And it's not about blame. It's not about this becoming somebody's fault. It's, oh, wow, and you found a solution. Let's work together collaboratively as a team to find a solution that's as smooth as possible, that is in the interest of patient safety. And so how do we change that attitude and that mindset around, so that people aren't so fearful that they're going to be blamed, if you like?
Yeah, it's a real shame. And I think I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, because, the policies are in there that already that say you should be supported and protected to raise concerns, etc. But for whatever reason, that's not happening. So I don't know if this national investigation is going to make any enforceable, accountable changes to that kind of system where, raising concerns becomes a very regulated and supported part of NHS maternity. But it is a real shame because, for example, midwives in this country are regulated by the NMC, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and we have a code of conduct, which when you're a newly qualified midwife, you have to study with a fine-tooth comb and kind of memorize parts of it and, know it back to front. And when I qualified as a midwife in 2013, there were all kinds of aspects of safe care that were in the code. But one thing that changed a few years ago when the code was revised was they added in something called a duty of candor, which means that when there has been a risk or actual harm to a member of the public in your care or somebody associated with your care, it's not just suggested, but it's actually required of a midwife to be open and honest about that. to inform the person who's been affected and to raise that concern and to correct it. So it's almost like this duty of disclosure. If I, for example, have given you the wrong medication, now I am actually duty bound by the NMC code to tell you, I'm really sorry, I've made a medication error. These are the possible consequences, or maybe it's okay anyway, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And there's kind of paperwork and other people you have to inform and so on. So in theory, the midwives on the shop floor are exercising this duty of candor, because when something goes wrong, we're very aware that we have to tell people that it has gone wrong. But this doesn't seem to apply to management, who in most cases are registered midwives as well. If you go to management and say, we have evidence that you've been using a growth chart, for example, that could potentially contribute to harmful outcomes, surely then, the management have a duty of candor to say, okay, we've looked at this, maybe we're persuaded by this evidence. We now have to disclose to our population that these growth charts are not evidence-based, or, that we may have been intervening based on false assumption, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just using that as an example. But really, this code should apply to everybody from the top down, ideally.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. So as a charity, we're working alongside certain MPs. So we're feeding this information to the MPs for them to have influence. And then we are working with certain national bodies. So we're gathering a group together to work with them to bring this to the table to see what they can do. And raising awareness and reporting it into the national maternity investigation that you've just said. We've got a one-to-one meeting to feed all this in, because it needs to be in there. It needs to be addressed. It needs to, we need transparency, we need accountability, and I think that could make a huge difference. But it's that part of this issue with the system has got to come from the top down, hasn't it, effectively?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
So we just have to hope that change is on its way.
God, we really hope. I mean, it's difficult to be optimistic because, as I said, I've been in this game for 12 years or 15 years if you count my 3 years of training, which were, very much clinical, and the direction of travel has just been going the one way. It's not been a good one. So, it's like trying to reverse the course of a cruise liner. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's probably going to be very slow if that change does come, because it's full steam ahead in the one direction at the moment. People often ask me kind of at the end of these type of interviews, like, well, what do you feel optimistic about? And I'm like, I don't know, not much actually, because it's pretty bleak. But yeah, we have to remain hopeful, and I think when we lose hope, that's probably a sign it's time to get out the game.
From experience, I think the problem is we've had so many different investigations and so many different reviews and so many different reports, and they all say the same pretty much. There's no real difference. Nothing huge has changed and come out of it. But we have to hold on to hope in the fact that, okay, we've got a new government now, we've got a new health secretary, and this is an opportunity. This rapid review by Baroness Amos is a new opportunity. And I know a lot of organizations and parents, which is key, listening to the parents. We're all feeding in, and so that to me, this is the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're all going to jump on it. We're all going to hold Wes Streeting accountable. Let's face it. I know so many MPs and Donna Ockenden, for one, that will hold him to accountable. So I just see this as a big opportunity, really. But for you, if you could make one meaningful change to help midwives save babies' lives, what would that be?
Yeah, I know it's really boring and mercenary, and it's not the one change that's going to solve everything, but it would be safe staffing. It absolutely would be, because as I said, you can implement all these other kind of warm, fuzzy things. You can do all the training about effective workplace cultures and teamwork and feeling safe to raise concerns and Absolutely, we should be doing all the work on anti-racism and improving outcomes for racialized populations, and that is not to diminish that at all. But, and it's a big but, if you do not have enough bums on seats, i.e., midwives on the floor looking after people, you cannot implement any of those other kind of cultural or ideological changes. So it would be more staff, and that has to be a kind of belt and braces approach. So you have better recruitment, but you also have strategies in place that will encourage better retention at the other end, because at the minute it's just like pouring into a leaky bucket. So that has to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I'd want adequate funding as well.
Yeah.
And that's part of the staff shortages. There's no funds, there's no budgets, and then there's no particular specialized roles being filled because they don't have funding and the budget anymore. And I think that would make such a difference if you had adequate staff.
It would. I mean, the fact that the maternity safety budget that was ring-fenced has been slashed from £95 million to 2 million just says it all right there. I think if West Streeting is losing sleep about anything at night, it should be that. And I think it just speaks to a massive misunderstanding of birth as just this kind of silly niche women's event. I will continue to say, like a broken record, that every single person on this planet is born. So this is an issue that affects all of us. I mean, it should be important enough if it just affects women, but it actually doesn't. Literally half of all babies are just really small men. And if male politicians and members of the public cannot see that this is an important fundamental event, affects their health for the long term, then I don't know how we can affect the change that we need to see.
100%, 100%. I don't see this as like a women's health issue. It's not about women's health because it affects all of us, like you say. You know, if a woman goes through birth trauma, that's going to affect the partner 100%, and not just the partner, the whole extended family, the grandparents, the friends. It affects everybody, and this is the future generation that we're bringing into the world. You know, it's quite important. It's really important. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a patient safety issue rather than a women's health issue, I think. So ending on hope.
Yes.
What,
yeah,
you know,
I'm sure I
what
can think of
drives
something.
you? You're still there. You're still doing this amazing work. You're still helping lots of families every single day, dealing with expectant parents. You know, despite all of these challenges that you have to go through, all the midwives have to go through on the front line, what is your hope for future maternity care?
I just really hope that in the future, maternity care will be recognized and resourced as this fundamental sector in public health. And when that recognition comes, everything else will fall into place. So, although I'm not hugely optimistic that that will happen, I'm still hopeful that it might, if that makes sense. And I suppose if anything gives me hope, it's the work I do with the next generation of midwives. You know, as I was saying, when I go out and teach students, which I do pretty regularly, I just can't believe how intelligent, dedicated, engaged, imaginative, enthusiastic they are. They're so much cooler than I was as a student. And if this is what the next generation of maternity carers looks like, then it would be an absolute tragedy if we let them down, because they can do amazing things for women and families. So hopefully in their careers, it will get better.
Someone that's considering starting a career in midwifery, what would you like to say to them?
I'll be completely honest. I've thought about this a lot in the course of my career, and I used to just kind of unequivocally encourage people and say, "Oh, it's amazing, it's wonderful." I don't do that anymore. I actually say to people, if there's anything else you enjoy doing more, go and do that thing instead, because midwifery takes so much out of a person now in its current form, that I'll be honest, the ultimate litmus test is like, would I recommend it to my own two children? And I wouldn't, which is really sad. I mean, even my eldest daughter is about to be a doctor if she passes her exam in a couple of months' time. And I even tried to discourage her from studying medicine, which is crazy, right? Because it's like every mother's, dream that their child would be a doctor or something like that. But because I know what the NHS is like and how it kind of eats its young, thinking about my own daughter going through that process was quite painful, quite, anxiety provoking. So I don't really massively recommend midwifery as a career to everybody nowadays. But if somebody is completely determined to do it, I would say you have to remember that birth is political. Midwifery is political now more than ever. It doesn't mean you have to be affiliated to any one particular party. You have to be switched on, active, aware of what's happening in the world, and you have to fight.
Yes, so you need to be of a certain character.
Yes.
To go into it, rhinoceros skin.
Yeah, and if you don't have it to begin with, you will develop it. Definitely. It's how you use that makes all the difference. So you don't want to be one of these kind of hardened battle axes that just doesn't care anymore, but you have to use it to make you stronger so that you can advocate for yourself and for the people in your care. And those are the kinds of midwives that we need.
Yes, we definitely need people to be able to advocate, speak up on behalf of other people as well, advocate for the parents. That's hugely important. Now, I know you're an author and you've written a few books. So tell us about your books, what they're called, and how people can get hold of them.
Yeah, thank you. So, in brief, it's like saying to someone, "Tell me about all of your children." So I'll just be very quick. The first book I actually wrote when I was a doula, which I did for 6 years before I trained in midwifery. It's called The Father's Home Birth Handbook, and this just came out of my conversations with so many couples, where it was usually the dad that would say, "I know my wife wants a home birth, but I have all these reservations." And I just saw this big gap in the market, for a book that had lots of stories from home birthing fathers that dads could pick up and see, okay, like other guys have done this, and this is how it might go from my point of view. So that was that book. Then in 2019, when I'd been a practicing midwife for 6 years, I published Hard Pushed, a midwife story, which is a memoir of my time in midwifery so far. But more than that, just a celebration of midwives and kind of what our role really is in the modern NHS. And I was very fortunate that was well received. That was a Sunday Times bestseller and published in a number of languages. And then I kind of broadened my lens to reproductive healthcare more generally. And in 2023, published Womb, the inside story of where we all began, which is all about the body's most misunderstood, magical, infuriating organ, the uterus. And that is now published in, I think, 19 or 20 languages around the world. And the next one, Birth Wars, the hidden battles changing our bodies and our world, will be out next autumn in 2026. So I cannot wait for that, because that really is about a lot of the issues that we've discussed today.
It's so exciting. Hopefully we can grab a copy and maybe give a giveaway to someone.
Yeah,
I don't know how
that
you
would
have
be
the
great.
time. Where do you find the time?
Well, good question. I mean, when I was working on Womb, it was kind of during the pandemic, and I was working lots of shifts and writing the book and homeschooling my two children in lockdown, and I just decided something had to give. So I actually left my full-time post. And since then, I work on the staff bank, which means I can pick up shifts kind of as and when it suits me. So I usually do like one or two shifts a week, to be honest. And more of my time is spent on writing and advocacy. And also both of my children have left home now. So it's busy, but I do have time. It's a good juggle. And just to your last question, sorry about where people can find these books and more about them. Um, All of those books should be available to order online. Some of them are still in bookshops as well. And there's more info about them on my website, which is just leahhazard.co.uk. And I'm very easily findable on Instagram, just at Leah Hazard.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and share your wisdom and experience with us on the Mama podcast. It's been absolutely fascinating, and you're doing such an incredible job, Leah, to raise awareness and advocate for midwives and parents. So thank you so much, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, share it with a friend or colleague. Make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on our next episode. If you'd like to support our work by fundraising or volunteering, please email contact@mamaacademy.org.uk. For more information on pregnancy and maternity services, please visit our website at www.mamaacademy.org.uk. We're also on all of your favourite social media channels. See you next time!